Gears 5. What can really be said about the Gears of War series? In the office metaphor of video games, Gears of War is the guy who arrives and leaves on time, keeps their department moving along, and doesn't make all that much noise. It's not as drunk and disorderly as Anthem, not as revered as the boss Super Mario, and generally just kinda sits there, does its thing. It's a generally reliable employee in this metaphor, and we don't expect much more than that. In the years that have passed, Microsoft decided to take more direct control of their two flagships, Gears and Halo, after both Bungie and Epic Games departed to other projects. Halo, in that transition, tripped immediately with Halo 4 and then fell down the entire staircase with Halo 5, and while it managed to pick itself up somewhat with Halo Wars 2, the franchise did not look the same, whereas Gears managed to go in the completely other direction. Gears as a series beforehand was always a bit creative, a bit stylistic, but ultimately the games were largely bland and unmemorable. The original trilogy wasn't really anything you could write home about, and events and set pieces, characters from all three games are pretty interchangeable and not really worth keeping to mind. I mean, it was a solid enough franchise to keep betting on, but nothing there to really appreciate outside of the setup that Gears of War 2 was. Gears of War 4 comes out onto the scene and shows that the Coalition, the studio Microsoft slammed together to make more Gears games, really had something they could do with the old formula. Introducing the next generation of characters, making them a bit more human, punching up the scripts and the dialogue of the cutscenes, throwing out some great set pieces, and ultimately just taking something that used to be a franchise consistently middle of the road and turned it into something that was approaching excellent and great. Gears 5 follows a few years after that, and the path forged by Gears of War 4 seems to have been a good one to take. After thinking about it, I'd call Gears 5 my second favorite game of the franchise behind Gears Judgment, which I remember being a pretty interesting yarn, and introduced the mistrustful UIR character that is the best one out of everybody in this entire series. While the second Gears trilogy keeps dragging along the cast of the original trilogy, and generally doing nothing with them since people like Coltrane, you really just can't do anything with as a character since he's just a loud personification of the sport of football. It's clear that the Coalition have some ambition to push Gears into the future outside of that by developing their own canon outside of the original trilogy. If anything else is said in this video, I want it to be that ultimately it is true that Gears 5 is worth your time to look at, and if nothing else, it will occupy you for at the least a good 10 hours in the campaign. So now, let's figure out why. Easily the best part, and the ultimate focal point of Gears 5 is the Coalition's focus on trying to build some interesting character developments from the next generation, following the pseudo-retirement of the old guard of Marcus, Cole, and Baird, and giving their characters some tangible depth, banter, dialogue, and interactions, instead of reducing their new characters to badasses who are so cool that they don't evolve from their one or two generic quirks. The team of JD, Kate, and Dell is a breath of fresh air in a series that is largely defined from its inability to adapt or change. The focus of Gears 5, for about 60 to 75% of the entire game, is on Kate, the spunky girl on the squad who begins a personal journey after she had to brutally sever her lost mother from the Locust hive mind, which ended up being the only thing that was keeping her alive at the end of Gears of War 4. Without Reyna, the new Locust are supposed to lose their only path to rebuilding their armies with a brand new queen. Following a mission of defending the human capital city from a fresh Locust invasion, things quickly become worse for wear for Kate, as the occasional visions she had been dealing with following the events of the previous games have spiraled out into an actual problem. During the events of a mission to recruit some people from the outsider camps, who largely distrust the Cog as a general rule, her and Dell, who is her companion for pretty much this entire story, she ended up being taken in by a Snatcher, who is a dog-like monster who specializes in kidnapping for the Locust. While she's inside the creature, Kate accidentally managed to link herself to the Locust hive mind and take control of a strong creature to deal some damage to the invasion. After that creature was killed by its own comrades and she was released from that Snatcher, it was very clear that something needed to be done about this mental instability. Thankfully, through her friend's contacts and experiences, she was able to do something about this. Going back to an abandoned Cog science lab, Kate ended up finding the forgotten Dr. Niles, who managed to upload his brain into a computer so that he could work for eternity on a project that was frankly pretty fucked up. But then again, Niles hasn't exactly been the high-minded one ever since he lost his humanity deliberately. Niles does offer a ray of hope to Kate, though. One of his machines can actually do the thing that she wants to fix her problem, severing her connection to the Locust Horde all at once. However, once they actually get there to the machine, Dell ends up getting cold feet about it and ends up ripping Kate out of the machine before it finishes, which somehow accomplished nothing as the operation was a success on both counts. Shocking to absolutely nobody, it did turn out that Niles had double-crossed the pair, and while the machine did sever her connection, while it was doing that, it also managed to revive Reyna in order for her to become the actual new Locust Queen. At this point, Kate returns to help the Cog with their bigger issue, which ended up being the total inability for them to actually fight the Locust in any sort of meaningful way. Throughout this new trilogy, it was becoming more and more clear that the Cog do not have any realistic path anywhere to win another war with the Locust. They simply just don't have the technology or the weapons. Baird at the beginning was giving them one faint glimmer of hope in the remaining Hammers of Dawn, which is what used to be the Cog series of satellite lasers that have now completely fallen into disrepair and non-functionality. In order to have a chance to get them repaired, the group does go out to the UIR to meet with Baird's old dickhead friend Paddock to help locate some rocket technology in order to launch more hammers into the network in order to reconnect the entire thing. And even though he really doesn't want to help the Cog because the UIR hate the tyrannical Cog, because this is Paddock and Baird, they actually somehow managed to come to a conclusion amongst the dickheadedry of them both. Afterwards, everyone returns to the human capital just in time for the entire city to be invaded once again by the newly organized Locust Horde. Kate and co. then have to fight their way through the destruction and the invasion in order to plant targeting beacons for the hammer to calibrate themselves, which worked about as well as you'd think. Things start getting desperate as Queen Reyna does finally appear in the city, and Kate ends up being forced into an odd situation where she can only save one of her friends, JD or Dell. I didn't really know what was going on at the time, so not even thinking about it, I ended up choosing Dell, and now that I'm writing this script, I kinda regret doing so. As much as I like Dell's well-meaning, quippy, helpful, and snarky personality, JD was the more developed and interesting character of the two. I mean, after she saw off the invasion, Kate and her remaining allies stand in a ruined human capital with absolutely no clue of how they're going to make it to next month now that they're under an organized threat that can appear literally anywhere on Syrah. Compared to the past, it's a pretty great story from Gears, since it actually develops the characters that Gears usually doesn't bother with, and never brings forward any notable events into these characters' lives. This game comparatively gets more personal, more painful, and more dramatic than pretty much anything else. The fact that we start getting to see more about the beginnings of the original Locust conflict through Kate's journey to find Niles was really poignant, since we never really got this information in the original 3 games, and after learning more about what actually happened, I can certainly say that Epic Games made the right call, never focusing on how E-Day eventually happened. Essentially, from what I understand, the Locust Horde came about because the COG were doing some human experiments to make the humans they were stealing more well suited to combat, and the creatures they ended up creating that were better than humans broke free and started organizing into the Horde under their leader, Queen Mira, who was the single human that they could find that was immune to emulsion, the fuel that humans were mining from Syrah, which later turned out to be horribly mutagenic, which apparently no one ever thought of at the time. After a smattering of child abduction, Mira freed herself to become the villain, who we'd eventually kill in Gears of War 3, so yeah, it was a better idea to paint the Locust as some random alien invasion back in the day, since the actual reason why they appeared in the first place just makes the COG look a lot more stupid than they already were, so, you know, good job on that one, guys, you made the right call. While almost the entire game focuses on what Kate is doing, there is another side to this timeline, and that is JD's development. At the beginning of Gears 5, JD is still the confident, brash leader of the new COGs, and also the son of Marcus Phoenix, so he has a lot going for him. But now that the plan is moving forward, and Baird has laid out the plan, that they need to get the Hammers of Dawn working immediately, because really, that's the only way that they're going to be able to make any tangible progress on defeating the Locust at all fronts, especially now that they're breeding and starting to retake control of their underground holdings. Obviously, after that was revealed, JD was picked to head up the mission to try and defend the capital from the first Locust invasion in the game, but as things were becoming worse and worse, and the Locusts were making ground and just generally destroying more and more important buildings and people, it was clear that there wasn't going to be much anybody could do if the Hammer of Dawn was not up and running. But at the end of the mission, after he and his group vanquished a couple of big swarm threats, and under the combat stress of it getting worse, JD over the radio managed to convince Baird, who ended up being the science man of the COG after he retired from being just a B-list soldier, to end up firing the only available Hammer of Dawn he had access to, which did end up going well in completing the mission. At first. About 30 seconds later, the hammer became completely unstable and started fragging the entire city around JD. The hammer was supposed to end up being a thing to clear a way for the convoy of evacuees that he was helping out to escape, but the hammer turned around and ended up fragging everybody in all of those trucks, including almost JD himself. The events of that mission end up radically changing JD's outlook on this whole thing. He decided to stay behind in the human capital to try and rebuild what he could with the help of Foz, who was an old comrade of his who got extremely jaded and untrustworthy after a mission a long time ago. He was forced to lead, went pear-shaped, and he got a bunch of innocent people killed that he got blamed for. But I guess since the COG barely have any soldiers, they just let him continue doing his thing. And he also allied himself with the First Minister, who was the leader of the COG, and is a completely conspiratorial, tyrannical bitch who nobody trusts, but everyone just has to deal with because she's essentially this story Stalin, and they can't evict her from her power. When the team does return to the human capital at the end of the game, JD is barely recognizable, but he still wants to help out his old team with the hammer calibration mission because he's thinking about the greater good. He's still a capable soldier and does pull his weight, bringing the player some hope that maybe JD could return to being the man that we know, the leader that we trusted. Well, in my game, I did fuck up and now he can't. JD's story ended with him turning his back on his friends and trying to do half a mission where he ended up getting completely disincorporated after a bad call, and Kate returned his COG tags to Marcus, which he obviously showed no emotion towards because he's such a badass he could barely give a shit. Well, JD, we hardly knew ye, but, that's just kind of how things go in a Locust invasion. So what is to say about the gameplay of Gears? You could take it as either a good or a bad thing that the series' iconic cover shooting has not changed in almost a decade, and it really all depends on whether you actually like that gameplay model or not. At the very least, it's been perfected to a damn science, and Gears 5 did not fuck that up. The guns feel great, the shooting is really meaty and satisfying, the movement on characters feels less clunky, and gives you some more options than the older Gears games to get around and do things, and do some executions, and some combos, things like that. You get a decent roster of those familiar weapons to change in and out depending on what you like and what's available, but even then, I do think that the Coalition does give an unfair advantage to the reliable Lancer. It's got the iconic good melee option, it has less kickback than other guns, it's more accurate, it has a bigger mag. The famous gun gets all the works, like the 2 Mega Evolved Charizards. The Coalition knows what the fans want. The heavy weapons in this game are actually pretty fun overall. They cause these huge explosions, big splash damage, and just cut into enemies like nothing else for a limited amount of time, which is really the only downside, that these things can't be reloaded, and if you fire the entire thing, the bullets will maybe last you, 45 seconds before emptying out. The Rogues Gallery is filled with the old classic enemies that have gotten a new paint job that everyone remembers from the past games, with the only real addition being the robot fighters who end up getting taken over by the Swarm, who do add some different challenges to the usual formula. There's actually some new shooting scenarios when they're included. The real strength of the Coalition as a developer is to take these well-worn weapons and enemies, add a few of them here and there, and just throw them into interesting settings and scenarios to make for some really unique shooting fun times, and shows that the Coalition does have some creative drive to do something fun with this series that has been so mediocre in the past, given to them by Microsoft. They actually know what they're doing with it. And that's shown even more by what types of levels they want to use. It's not the iconic brown, gray, more brown, and even more brown after that. Gears 5 actually goes with some vibrancy, some actual color. We got a sprawling, sparkling, and alternatively burning cityscape that moves into the typical single spooky level in the abandoned lab, to a frozen wasteland and a yawning red desert, followed interchangeably by a bunch of the subsections inside of the level, so that you're usually seeing new things throughout going through the acts, which ends up being why this game can take you around a dozen hours to finish. It's, something that's actually fun to look at, something that's actually fun to explore, just because, rather than the original trilogy, at the very least, most of the levels look completely stark and different to each other, so that you can actually tell where the hell you're supposed to be going, rather than just this constantly sprawling brown mess that consistently just goes in a really weird line all the way through until you get to the end. It's just an actual journey rather than a meandering mess. And through that design shrewdness is how the Coalition shows that it is a capable developer, because it can take the formulaic and tired Gears series and change it into something that's challenging, vibrant, and actually pretty damn fun at times, believe it or not. Okay, so while most of the minute-to-minute shooting has been near exactly the same for years in this series, the actual selling point that was included with Gears 5 with this usual gameplay style is to tie it to some open-world level design. These levels were the frozen wastes and the UIR desert, and what this ends up meaning is that these are the levels that equip the player with a actually pretty cool and fast vehicle to get through the open world, since both of these levels are a lot larger than anything else that Gears has ever done before. The levels then can include a few side objectives that you can go do in some of these buildings that are littered around the level that you can visit while you're commuting to the actual story and the actual important stuff on these levels. The problem is that the open world of this game is largely pointless, kind of like Kingdom Hearts 3. The rewards that you can get from them are largely useless collectibles or resources, and most of the objectives don't have plots or characters attached to them that you would expect out of a side quest, and right there almost completely defeating the entire point of side quests in one go. It's a much more enjoyable game if you don't do them, since the side quests take a lot of time and they're all over the place, so you have to travel long distances, and occasionally even the side quests don't just work correctly, either by having broken markers or just badly explained ways to progress the quest. On the other hand, the vehicles they do give you are really fun, and occasionally doing high-speed stunts while you're traveling fast over the wastelands is really cool. But there really is no reason that Gears of War should try doing an open world unless they actually put some effort and some RPG flavor into their side quests. That's kind of what's needed if you want people to go off the beaten path and do something that is actually optional. If it's not fun, then what's the point? Nobody wants to go to a random nondescript building in the desert just to end up finding that they have to shoot their way through 3 waves of guys for some sort of flavor text collectible or a gun upgrade. Like, that's not compelling, that's not important. That's not something that we're gonna note other than the fact that it's a really weird thing to add to a third-person shooter. Come on, guys, you gotta keep your head in the game on this one. I mean, what's the point in dumping your effort into this nonsense? At this point, it's clear to me beyond a shadow of a doubt that Gears 5 is going to put the Coalition in a real good spot to start developing Gears 6, or whatever the finale of the second trilogy is going to be called, because this developer has got the drive and the creativity to make it happen. Their additions to the series have been the best I've ever seen since I have started playing Gears of War games, because the Coalition's additions have the better characters, they have the better story beats, the better plot progression, the better locations, shooting scenarios, just better everything than what the original trilogy brought us. And ultimately, all that put together shows us that they have the better vision for what the future of Sierra is going to be. This game has the most interesting plot since Judgment, with the reveal of the origins of the Locust and Kate's direct connection to the lineage of Mira. This game was actually throwing some legitimate drama bombs into the arena, and the low-key way that the Coalition killed off one of their new main characters was well executed and planned, rather than the comparatively overblown and fake emotional ending of Delgado, or whoever that Spanish guy was in the end of Gears of War 3. And this will actually have some implications in the following game, rather than Marcus essentially forgetting his best friend almost immediately in the aftermath of that game. Not even waiting for the sequel afterward, he just immediately stopped giving a shit. Gears 5 has the challenging and meaty, gory shooting, great locations to explore and shoot things in, and again, is not just a completely brown mess of metallic bullshit. They have the cool scenarios to make the combat more interesting, put it into some unique challenges, some unique places to actually put a freaking new spin on just cover-based shooting, because even as iconic as it is, the Coalition does understand that you need to pump it up a little bit, to actually punch it into something that's actually fun to do in a new way to do it. And all this proper pacing, all these proper set pieces, the turns, the twists, pushing this campaign forward is the way that they can actually easily make it exceed 10 hours long. Something that is actually remarkable compared to the other AAA shooting franchises that this game competes with. Ultimately, the Coalition wanted to tell a story and build their own canon with this game. And I do respect that ambition, because they know how to develop games pure and simple. This isn't just a fluke, this isn't just you know, a one-time thing. They know what they're supposed to be doing. And sure, this game is not going to be the most exciting thing ever, and while it's never going to get the headlines of a Super Smash Bros., the Coalition are still working diligently and very hard to try and make something special with the Gears of War series. Something that nobody put a lot of stock into ever being anything more than just a generally good game. And because of that, I am ready for whatever the heck they have planned for how they're going to finish off their trilogy. Because at the very least, it's probably going to be something I'm not expecting beyond the obvious example that the Locusts are going to die again because they haven't created a new villain, but at least we get an interesting way to fight them. And with all that being said, I'll leave you guys with a final scoreboard and a slight, small call to action at the end of the video. I tried to do some things a bit differently with this script by breaking it down into sections just rather than being a meandering mess of bullshit. If you like it or hate it, you know, leave a comment and I'll take it into consideration. You know, there are things I'm trying to change. I'm thinking that this script idea might be a good one for these longer AAA games. And with that, I will leave you guys for tonight with a victory for gamers because you all deserve it. I'll see you next time for some more Gears action in the story DLC.